What is your name? How old are you? And when were you born?
My name is Joe N. Pigott. I was born October the 13th, 1925 in a shadow of a sawmill down in Pearl River County. My father was the paymaster and storekeeper at that time, and we only lived there for about 2 or 3 months after I was born, and moved to Tylertown, and lived in Tylertown until 1929, and moved into Magnolia, where we lived until January the 1st, 1935, and then lived 6 months in Liberty, which was quite an experience, and then moved to McComb in July the 1st, 1935, and have enjoyed living here ever since.
Judge Pigott, tell us something about your immediate family, your spouse and your children.
Well, I married Lorraine Holloman, who was a school teacher here in McComb in 1953, and we have 4 children, 3 sons and 1 daughter. 2 of my sons are attorneys. One is practicing in Jackson. The other got fed up with the law and instead went out and organized a corporation, and it was very, very successful. So he retired just about the time he turned 40. And then my daughter is in Raleigh, North Carolina. She teaches teachers of gifted programs in the state of North Carolina through the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. That is, she goes to different cities and they set up a 2-day or 3-day conference, and she takes care of that, and they get, the teachers get credit for it. And then my son Jimmy was with Delta Airlines for 17 years and just got completely burned out with that, and now he is working in a Barnes and Noble bookstore in North Atlanta.
What was your occupation, and who was your employer, if you had one in the beginning?
Well, right after I got out of college, I went to Ole Miss, University of Mississippi, and got a degree in business administration and then a degree in law, and practiced law here in McComb. And I was city attorney of McComb during the administration of A.E. Bill Andrews and during the administration of J.W. Alford as mayor. And then I was elected county prosecuting attorney and then district attorney. And then I didn't run for election in the district. I'd served 19 years prosecuting people, and I decided I had had enough of that, so I began just practicing law and was elected circuit judge in 1974 and served until I retired in 1992. Now, I was attorney for McComb School District, but that was a non-paying job for 19 years. Well, really the first 16 years I didn't get paid, but the last 3 years, Julian Prince came back from Corinth and brought the message that they paid their attorney. And so they put me on a grand scale of $1,000 a year, $80-something a month. But anyway, I saw the McComb School District through some trying times from 1954 until 1975.
When did you retire?
I retired June the 30th of 1992, but then I'm a senior status judge, and the Supreme Court sends me different places to hold court for judges who have recused themselves. I've held court in 28 different counties, and I'm about to make it 29. I've got to try a case in Jasper County at Paulding, Mississippi, which which it would be an unusual experience for me.
McComb was a quintessential railroad community really up until the 1960s or 70s. How has the railroad influenced your life?
Well, you could hardly live in McComb without being influenced by the railroad. When I first came here, many of this, my fellow students, their parents worked, or their father worked for the railroad. And when the railroad laid off people, that was big news. And the merchants would extend credit to the people until they went back to work. But the Illinois Central was the heart of the city of McComb. It was the lifeblood. And it employed about 1,000 men at that time in your car department and the machinist and the locomotive area, and then the on-the-road crews. They changed, every crew changed in McComb at that time. And the railroad was the Illinois Central was a very good corporate citizen of the city. For instance, in 1941, my senior year in high school, we were invited to the Toy Bowl, play football in the Toy Bowl in New Orleans. And someone persuaded the Illinois Central, I don't know who, but to run a special train from Macomb to New Orleans and back. And I don't remember now, but it didn't cost much, I'm sure, to ride. And that gives you an idea of the fact that the railroad was a very good citizen, corporate citizen of the town. And many of our leaders and community leaders were employed by the Illinois Central. And that was when they began to reduce their employment, when they closed the shops and so forth, it was quite tragic for a while there. Fortunately, we had oil that came in about the same time, and that helped to alleviate some of the pressure on it. But no, the Illinois Central was very much the city of McComb at that time.
Well, I understand that many houses close to downtown McComb were built by the railroad for railroad employees.
Oh yes, if you look on Minnesota Avenue, well, the house with the fig tree is there now, which is a catering place. And across the street, there's a house, two-story house. Those were built by, I know, by the railroad. And there are 3 or 4 other houses that were built in the 19th century that were primarily around Minnesota Avenue, along in that area, in the heart of Macomb.
What are some local events or occurrences that stand out in your memory?
Well, immediately after World War II, the leaders in the city and county decided we needed a program to encourage agriculture, balance agriculture with industry. We were interested in the agricultural part of it. And for instance, the Rotary Club took the dairy industry, and the Lions Club, I think, took the pork and all. And what they would do is furnish cows or pigs, and others had poultry and so forth, to farmers to get them to go into production of beef or milk or whatever. And that was a very good program for several years. I don't know why it sort of fizzled out, but it was quite a good program. And it was operated primarily by the county agent's office. And but it involved quite a number of people. And they had an annual banquet, and everybody who was anybody was there. It was quite an affair. And some of the other events, of course, the county fair and so forth, but also a big event was when McComb shops of the railroad built the first aluminum car, rail car. And when it was completed, there was quite a celebration. It was commemorated by quite a number of people. The president of the railroad came down and quite a number of others. And that car, I believe, is still in existence, but it was built out of aluminum. And I don't know that they ever built another one, but that was it. And of course, a lot of downtown, especially, were happy when they changed over from steam engines to diesel, because I was practicing law, and at that time our office was not air conditioned, and we had just exhaust fans, which also pulled in a lot of air that was laden with soot. And if you left some white paper lying out on a desk, in a few hours it was just covered with soot, you know, because it was in the air. You just didn't, and I didn't realize that we were breathing that, you know, everybody in McComb, until they changed over to a diesel, and we don't have that anymore, of course. You know. But the old steam engines were more romantic to me. You had the fireman that was at one time shoveling coal. Then later they had where they could feed the coal without shoveling it. But and the engineers that were here were colorful people, you know. And in my high school class, had it not been that Pearl Harbor happened in December of 1941, I graduated in 42, and we had 44 boys in our class, and I would say that at least 20 were looking forward to trying to get on with the railroad, and hopefully to get, what did they call it? Anyway, apprenticeship for 4 years, and you could work 4 years for the railroad and become a machinist or a carpenter or a number of occupations. And then there were some that were wanting to apply to get on to become firemen with the hopes of someday becoming an engineer, or flagman and hope for someday to become a conductor. So it was very much in the future of those young men. But the war came on in 1941, and when we finished in 1942, almost everybody, all the males, went into the service. And some came back and got apprenticeships. And I have 2 or 3 friends that I finished high school with that became locomotive engineers. And they were engineers at the time of the transition from steam to diesel electric power. All right?
Well, ironically, the diesel was pretty much the beginning of the end for McComb's railroad career, because everything was predicated around the steam engine, wasn't it?
Exactly. You had to, some people don't remember, we had a turntable where you could pull a locomotive up on the turntable and turn it around and run it into a little slot and work on it. And they could work on, I don't know, 8 or 10 maybe at the time. And when they got it repaired, they could back it up and onto the turntable and turn it around. Now that was important because of this. During World War II, it was important to guard that, because that's the only turntable that was south of Pigott. And if you wanted to turn an engine around, you had to come to McComb to get it turned around because it was facing one way or the other. They could turn it around in New Orleans, but on a Y, I think it was, but they didn't have a turntable. And so it was pretty important to guard that turntable down there, or at least they felt like it was. And I don't know whether the Germans or Japanese found out about the turntable or not, but if they had, it was guarded. Of course, the railroad furnished a lot of soldiers. There were a number of men that worked for the railroad who, several of them ended up in a special railroad battalion and were sent to Italy and operated at railroads over there. And so the railroad has played an important part of McComb.
I can still remember the choo-choo trains, as we called them, when I was growing up. There was something magical about them.
Mm-hmm.
What are some national events or occurrences that stand out in your memory?
Well, I have to think about that. Of course, I was a Depression child and a World War II veteran. So between those two things, we had some national events that I can't pinpoint exactly, but we had well, one of the big events that happened to McComb would not be considered important to anybody else, maybe. But about 1933, something like that, 32 or 33, the biggest football star in Louisiana was Abe Michael from McComb. And he was such a great star that then Governor Hewitt P. Long wanted to name him a state senator. But he found out he lived out of the state, and so they couldn't do that. And if I'm not mistaken, they made him an overseer of the highways. And that is, he would, as he rode, which he didn't have a car, but as he rode, if he saw any defect, he was to report it. But at any rate, the LSU was to play Army at West Point. And so they ran a special train by pressure from Governor Hewitt P. Long. And they came to McComb and got off the train, and the LSU band led the parade up Main Street, and they stopped in front of Michael's store. Abe Michael's father ran and played a little bit, and of course Mayor X.A. Kramer and of course Oliver Emmerich were there very much, and Huey Long, and it was quite an event for us at that time to have a national, we considered a national figure in McComb, and they played a couple of numbers and got back on the train and went to West Point. I don't remember whether they won or lost, but we had the benefit of having had a part of LSU on our main street. I can't think of the next thing that might be considered a national event, but that happened here. But of course, we had some national events that occurred in 1964, and that made the national news. But it wasn't our desire that we made the news. That's which I was district attorney at that time, and so I very much was aware that we were having a difficult time.
You're referring to what was called the Long Hot Summer.
The Long Hot Summer,
1964.
1964, right? It sure was. And fortunately, there was no one seriously injured in all of it. And we were able to get it stopped, and by prosecuting the people that were found to, well, they pled guilty, so it must have been, and we were able to get it stopped. All right?
Is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
Well, you know, I reflect on the idea of, I'm glad I live in McComb, because within 10 minutes of my house, I counted 84 places to eat. If you like Chinese or Mexican or hamburgers or pizza or anything else, fish or anything else, you could find a place to eat here in McComb. I found 84 different eating establishments. We have a good hospital. We have a good library system. And we have adequate public school system and a good private academy. And our hospital is outstanding. And we have good doctors for those who need them. And it's just a good place to live, in my opinion, especially when I meet some of my friends who live in cities that it takes them 15 or 20 minutes to go to the post office even. I mean, so we're fortunate really to have all of these facilities right here with us.
What do you remember about the integration of the schools?
Well, I was attorney for a school district. J.W. Alford, Bill Neville, and Gerald Mixon came to my office in 1954. The legislature in a special session in 1953 had passed the law that would require the consolidation of schools and the elimination of some school districts. And so the way it was set up, we knew that they were going to force McComb to take in Summit and Enterprise. And they didn't really want to, because McComb School District was bound by the city limits of McComb. We didn't have any transportation problems, didn't have any school buses, and didn't want to get into that, but were forced to. And so we decided, well, okay, since we were going to be forced to take those in, we wanted to have a part in drawing the lines and all, which we did. Well, the next problem that arose was building new school buildings. Every school building that's in use now, except the high school, was built during that era. And the high school had been built. My father was president of the school board at the time. It was built because our former high school had burned in 1943, and then after the war they built the present high school. So we had to negotiate contracts, of course, with building contractors, and we had to had the overseeing of the building of those buildings. And we thought that would be the hardest thing we would ever have to do. Well, they came up with the integration situation. And so the school board met about 3 nights a week. They would meet until midnight at least, trying to decide how can we solve this. At first, they decided what we would try to do is draw lines, and everyone in this district goes to this school, everyone in that district goes to the other. But when you do that, there are 2 or 3 things. When you do that, you're changing property values, because there are some people that want to live in one school district, and you're changing the value of their property. As you can see right now, property now is more valuable in the North Pike School District. And you can tell that because they advertise it, you know. Anyway, we worked at that for weeks and finally decided we just couldn't do it. And so we decided, okay, you had to take three grades and the first year. And so we chose the first grade, the 10th, 11th, and 12th. They had to have 4 grades, I mean. Well, they wouldn't approve that. And so the HEW came over and we worked with them what we could do, and we finally began an integration of 4 grades per year. And then that was not going as rapidly as they wanted it to, and so we decided, the board decided, well, what we will do is we will, they anticipated the biggest problem would be at recess and the noon hour between the children. And so they decided what we would do is we would designate Higgins School as being the teaching social studies, and McComb High School, Gibson, would be teach all of your math and science. So during the day, you'd see yellow buses going back and forth all the way from McComb High School to Higgins and back. They would bus them over there for an hour and they'd come back. Fortunately, even though they were crossing the railroad at a grade crossing, never did have any wrecks or anybody hurt, but oh man, when I think back at it. But we ran up a bill of about $64,000 transportation expenses. And so we decided, even though we got that approved by the federal court, which by the way, they kept threatening to sue McComb School District. And so we said, okay, sue us. Well, they never would file the lawsuit. So I found this case that was in the federal court. Judge Nixon at that time was the federal judge in charge of that case. And so we filed and intervened in that case and got our plan approved. And so it was sort of a friendly thing with us in the court. The HEW found out about it when we showed them the court order. And so later, of course, we had to change it and had to go back before Judge Nixon and get it changed so that we would teach science and math at both schools. And then we fully integrated as it is now. Really, although we had problems, we had far fewer problems than many, many other places. And really the problems were more with the parents than the students. The students really never did, we never did have any, as far as I know, never did have any fist fights or problems at all. And if we had known how good they would be football players, we might have taken them earlier. I don't know. We didn't really have any great problem with the formerly all black students schools, and they mixed in pretty well. I will give Julian Prince a lot of credit because we saw this coming really a year or two before it actually happened. And so he wanted to upgrade the teachers in the formerly, well, the black schools. And so he got money from somewhere and gave scholarships to many of the black teachers. And they most of them went to Michigan. I don't know whether Michigan State or University of Michigan. during the summer for 2 or 3 summers and got a master's degree. So we probably had more blacks with master's degrees than whites. And he did that for this reason. He didn't want the white parents to feel that they were getting inferior instruction from a black teacher. So he wanted to try to upgrade the teachers as well as he could. And that was never in the paper, of course, not publicized, but that happened. And for a while there, I'm sure we had a lot of teachers that had master's degrees. And all right, sir.
You mentioned Xavier Kramer and
Yeah.
Oliver Emmerich. Who were some other outstanding individuals that you remember in your years in McComb? I know that's hard to pick and choose sometimes, but.
Well, back at that time, city of McComb had a mayor and commission form of government. You had 2 commissioners, Mr. Rutledge and Mr. Watkins, and a mayor, X.A. Kramer, and they ran the city. And one of them was the inside, and one of the inside commission, one was outside. By that I mean the inside. One of them was in charge of everything in City Hall, the tax collecting, the city clerk office, and so forth. The other one was in charge of the outside part of the city, that is the police department, fire department, and trash, pick it up and so forth. And they went from that to the selectman system really after Mayor Wall became mayor in 1940. Mr. Kramer died in 1942, and it was after that they went to a different system. I've noticed in the paper they keep arguing about the selectman, the system, but it hadn't always been that way. It was a commission form for many years, and where you had just a mayor and 2 commissioners. And like I say, I was city attorney for a time during Bill Andrews' administration and J.W. Alford's administration. Both of those were leaders. And in fact, during J.W. Alford's administration, they completely redid the water and sewer system. Now that was, of course, a long time ago. I mean, it was in 54, 55. But at that time, when the people got off at 4 o'clock from the railroad and they went home to take a shower, the water pressure in town just went down. You couldn't get water to cook with hardly, because at that time there was only a 4-inch line that went down West Street, and all on the west side of West Street were just small individual pipe to the houses. It had just, it had happened, and the town had grown and had grown out, and so they had to redo that. They did it by putting an 8-inch line up and down West Street, and then 4-inch lines off of that, and so forth. Because, like I say, at 4:15, people couldn't get out in that area, what we call the Sinclair subdivision. You couldn't get water, and then they redid the sewer. At that time, up until then, you only had 1 water tank in McComb, and that was on the grounds of the East McComb School. And that was the only water tank we had. And so they put 3 water tanks, one over on College Street and one up in Berglund, and which increased the circulation of water. I mean, the water that's up in the water tank, that may not come into your house for a long time. It just creates pressure in the pipeline. So it's important that you have enough overhead storage, elevated storage, to keep pressure within the pipeline, you know. So anyway, we did that, issued a $850,000 bond issue, and we almost got run out of town. They said, oh no, this is terrible. We'll lose our houses. We can't pay but they did. And it was 20-year bonds, and it was at less than 4% interest, which was very low at that time. And they were what we call revenue bonds. And that is, the bonds were payable only out of the revenue from the water system. And we had to do this. We had to raise the basic rate from $2 to $3. And that was down. My water bill last month was something like $90. But that wasn't because of what we did back then. That's what they're doing now. And but we had some outstanding leaders, I think, back at that time. Probably do now, but those are the ones I can think of. Yeah.
What were some of your memories of your World War II experiences?
Well, I joined the Army. I finished high school, I was 16. And I went a year to Southwest, and at that time they went on to a 6-week program where you took 2 subjects for 6 weeks, and you acquired 6 hours in 6 weeks. So I went up there, and then I went 6 weeks to Ole Miss. And so I was really a first or maybe a second semester sophomore when I was 17 years old. I joined the Army, and my mother agreed to it. And anyway, I was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I was in the most fouled up infantry outfit there ever was. What they did, there was such a desire for men. They took all of the college ROTC students. If you were a senior, they gave you your commission and you became a second lieutenant. If you were a junior, you had to go through OCS. You had to go through 90 days. Okay, our lieutenants had all had to go through OCS, and they were bitter about that. But our sergeants and corporals had been in the same situation, but they had flunked out of OCS. Maybe they didn't line their shoes up or make their beds up tight enough or something. And so they resented the way they'd been treated, and they did not like the officers. And so sometimes the lieutenants would tell us one thing, and then he would walk away, and the sergeant would say, don't do that way at all. Do it this way. And as soon as he left, the corporal would tell us another way. And so I realized that I had to get out of that outfit, because I was selected to sweep out the battalion headquarters one night. And I didn't realize at that time how fortunate I was. But I went over there, and by the way, the battalion headquarters, the battalion commander was a colonel who had been a meter reader in civilian life, and his executive officer was a bartender in civilian life. They had been in the National Guard. Anyway, but the sergeant major of that was a regular Army man, and he'd been in for goodness knows how long. But anyway, I was over there sweeping out the battalion headquarters, and he was over there drinking bourbon right out of the bottle. And he told me, he said, you know, this outfit's going overseas as a unit. I said, my gosh, how did I get out? He said, well, I've got enough seniority. I'm going to stay here as a training. But he said, you could go in the paratroops, if you will. Well, I'd been over there, and I'd seen them jumping out, and it didn't look like any skill to me, and so I signed up and went into paratroop. And you only got 4 weeks training, and then I was sent up. They were organized in the Office of Strategic Services in right near Washington, and I went up there, and then they decided I needed some skill in demolition, blowing up bridges and so forth. And so they sent me to Camp Robinson, Arkansas, and I took, we blew up just about everything over there we could find. And then I went overseas, and I was assigned, I reported in to General Walter Bedell Smith, who people behind his back called a beetle, but anyway, I did, of course. He became like an uncle to me. He was so nice. For instance, when I reported in, and I was, like I say, I was 18, and he said, well, Sergeant, I'd made Sergeant, but he said, have you ever been to London? I didn't tell him, but I'd never been out of Mississippi and Louisiana until I went in the Army. He said, well, I'm going to start you out over here with a pass, a weekend pass. And I said, well, that would be nice. And he said, if you'll be out here at 4 o'clock, right out front, I'll give you a ride. And so I was, of course, and got out there and got ready to get into his staff car. And I said, you go ahead. He said, you get in the car first. I said, no, sir, after you. I didn't know the Army protocol requires that the lower rank gets in the car first, so that the higher rank gets out first. Anyway, I learned something. But anyway, he was very nice to me, and I was assigned to blow up some bridges, which we did. And in your travels, did you go to Heidelberg?
No, we didn't get that far south.
At Heidelberg, it's over the Neckar River.
We've both been. You've been to Heidelberg, haven't you?
The Heidelberg is on the Neckar River, and on one side, up on the, I call it a hill, but you might call it a mountain. There's this huge castle and all up there, and on the other side is down where the university is and all. Anyway, they did not want the Army was retreating, and they didn't want them to retreat across that bridge up into the castle, because it'd be door-to-door fighting to take them out. And so they sent us in there to blow that bridge up. And it was a bridge that had been built by the Romans. It was a keystone bridge, which means that the more weight you put on it, the stronger it gets. But if you can blow that keystone, it's an arch, blow that keystone up, it'll fall of its own weight. And so that's what we did, and blew 2 of the arches out. And I went back later after the war was over and took a picture of it. And then about 25 years later, my sister, 20 years later, my sister was teaching over there in Germany, and she sent me a postcard with that picture of it. And it had been completely restored, the bridge had. You could still see where it had been blown, but they restored it. And there now, that was the only bridge across the Neckar in that area. And now there are a couple more that have been built. And anyway, we knew where the bridges were that would support a Sherman tank, which is 33,000 pounds. And so when they began moving fast, we were supposedly engineers, and they put us in with the tanks, and so I was in a tank that we went into Heilbronn, and we had a man, one of our soldiers that spoke fluent German, and he asked the Burgermeister, is there going to be anybody shooting at us? Oh, no, we promise, they weren't going to be. Well, it started in there, and I mean, it was important because the tankers could open the tanks. And believe me, it gets hot in a closed-up tank. And so they had the tanks open, they started in, and somebody started shooting at them. And so the order came down, pull back. And they pulled back right outside of that town, city, really, Halbrun, and shelled it all night long with tanks and tank destroyers. And the next morning, we had to have dozer tanks to come up there and clear it away because it was just, there was hardly a building that was complete, that was not destroyed. And so then the next day we got to a place called Dinkelbool. Have you ever been there?
Yes, we have.
Dinkelbool? All right. There, the Burgermeister came out with a flag, white flag, and he was surrendering the town. So it was taken without firing a shot. Beautiful little town, and it was, as I recall, every window had a window box with red geraniums in it. No, it was a pretty town. It was so pretty we stayed there 2 days. Anyway, we went on down and, well, we got down to Munich, and right out of Munich, about 12 miles out of Munich, was Dachau, which was one of their concentration camps. And it was unbelievable. I didn't know that anybody could shrink down to that size where you could see their heart beating. You could see their blood pulsing. It was, you know, they had no flesh, you might say, on. They were so thin. And in fact, the general made the city administration of Munich go out there and see it for themselves because they were prone to deny that they knew anything about it. But
so you were one of the people who went into
Dachau, yeah. And but then we had to keep going. We just got there, and all the guards had left. You know, yeah. And went on. But it was quite some experience for 18, 19-year-old boy. You know, really. And so I came back here and went to Walter Reed Hospital for a short time. And then I was made Post Intelligence Officer of Camp Shelby. Now that is a high-sounding title. It is about, the work was about equivalent to an insurance adjuster. Because I would report every Monday. Monday morning I'd pick up the MP reports of some soldier that had gotten in trouble in New Orleans or wherever. And then I'd go to New Orleans and check with the police down there and find out the facts and go across to Biloxi and then back into, it was not a very, it sounded real high. But anyway, I did that, and I found that Ole Miss was going to start their second semester in about a week, and so I got out in January of 1946. And yeah, and started my schooling there, finished business administration, and then went into law school. Yeah. So I took one summer off and drove a sightseeing bus up in Glacier Park, Montana. Have you ever been to Glacier Park?
No, I haven't.
That is it's like being in Switzerland. I mean, the terrain is, it's a beautiful national park. Yes, sir.
One final thing, McComb, when I was growing up here, was referred to as the hospitality city of America. Would you agree that that was a fair?
It was. You know, you can ask these people that have come in here from up north, some of them that, for instance, like Dick Busby and Dick Spinning and some of the others I can think of that moved here And even after their jobs were no longer here, they stayed. You look at the ones that they have been here, and then maybe they had to go to other places, but when they retired, they came back to McComb, because it's I think that the social strata is wider, that you can be accepted here easier than you can in some towns, some cities. There's some cities that unless you were born there, you just are never quite. Natchez is one of them. I got some friends over at Natchez that have moved over there from other places, and they said, you know, we are always been. I've been over here 10 years, but I'm still a newcomer, you know. And I don't think that's true in McComb. I think we pretty well accept people, and right.
Well, my wife and I retired.
Mm-hmm. There's a good example.
And we came back.
Yeah, that's
one
right.
thing she and I discussed, and we
Right.
decided that we lived in a lovely town for 33 years, but we wanted to come home.
Well, it's a good place to live. It's a good place to raise children too. I mean, it's I found that and no place is perfect, but it's closest to it that I know of. Yeah, and within what, 2 hours or so, you can be in New Orleans, or you can be in Jackson, or whatever. And so it's, you know, I regret that our interstate system was what I think killed the railroad passenger service. I can remember a lot of times businessmen and all would get on to Panama and go to New Orleans for the day and get back in that evening, you know. And we had about 6 passenger trains running, 3 each way at one time, and it was convenient to travel. And but you did that was before the interstate system.
That's how I got back and forth from college in Jackson, was on one of those afternoon trains.
Right, exactly. And I think that our nation is making a big mistake by letting our railroad system go down, both freight and passenger. Because if you go to Europe, that's one thing. If they tell you that train's going to go at 4:05, you better be there at 4:05, or it's going to move out. And they run fast, they run on time.
And a lot of them.
A lot of them, exactly. And it's a good way to move people. And I don't know, but I think from my experience that I think that the freight service has picked up considerably without railroad. I judge that this. I live, you know, a few hundred yards from the railroad. And I used to never really be that conscious of the railroads. You know, either they may have hired some new engineers who love to blow the horn, but I hear it a lot more frequently now than I used to. And the trains are long. I mean, you've got 70, 80, 100 cars sometimes. And so I think that the business must be improving. Freight business. Yeah.
Well, Judge Pike, anything else you'd like to say?
No.
Well, thank you very, very much.
All right, sir.
This is
Good.